cross-party lines on hunger and nutrition issues. In the 1970s, they expanded the domestic school lunch program and established the highly successful WIC program, which provides food and education for pregnant and postpartum women, infants, and children.
But if we were going to serve the interests of hungry people in this country or in other countries, we had to do it on a bipartisan basis.
In perhaps their greatest domestic success, McGovern and Dole worked together to enact sweeping reforms to the U.S. food stamp program by expanding it to millions of people who were either unaware of its availability or unable to afford participation.
If you ask recipients of the food stamp program how it originated and who sort of pushed it along, I don't think they would know, but that's not important. The important thing is that they benefit and they have a better quality of life.
There are 130 million children in this world who never darken a schoolhouse door. Their idea was to say to poor kids across the world and to their parents, you can have one good, nutritious meal a day, no matter how poor you are, but you have to come to school to get it. After we passed that little bitty initiative in a multi-trillion-dollar budget, school enrollment around the world in the first year went up by more than 6 million children. 6 million futures George McGovern helped to make. What does all this teach us? George McGovern has taught us that politics is not about power or position, but about people, progress, and principle.
From my first days in public life, the central interest was ending hunger both in this country and in the world around us. That really began with World War II, when I saw real hunger in war-torn Italy. Italy today is probably the best fed country in the world. Not so in the middle of the Second World War, when that country was laid waste. So that's when I first decided that if I ever got a chance to reduce hunger in the world, wherever I found it, I was going to make the most of it. So, while I pray for peace, what I think is soluble is hunger. And we need a victory. We need something. We need a victory over illiteracy. We need a victory over unsanitary conditions. We need a victory over AIDS. We need a victory over hunger. And we can win that one in the next 10 to 15 years.
Senator George McGovern, passionate humanitarian and inspirational hunger fighter. We are honored to be here today as champions for the cause that he cared so much about. I'm Dr. Alicia Vincent, Executive Director for the McGovern Center for Leadership and Public Service here at Dakota Wesleyan. On behalf of the Conference Organizing Committee and the campus of Dakota Wesleyan, welcome to the 2015 South Dakota McGovern Hunger Summit. We hope that today will enlighten you with information about the hurdles we face when confronting hunger in the 21st century and inspire you to do what you can with the gifts that you've been given to draw closer to George's dream of ending hunger. Although eliminating hunger seems hard to fathom, we are also here today to celebrate the fact that since 2000, we've come closer, reducing global hunger by as much as half according to the United Nations. But half is only halfway, and there's more to be done, whether being better stewards of the land and what it produces, or being more sensitive to the hardships of our neighbors. We can learn more, give more, and do more as fellow hunger fighters. A special welcome today to the guests who have traveled here to be with us this morning, including representatives from Bread for the World and Partners Against Hunger, South Dakota State University, Mount Marty, Mitchell Tech, and Feeding South Dakota. And also now, if you turn around and you wave to the balcony, everybody wave up there to the balcony. Thank you so much, and wave back to us. Thank you, that's very good. A special welcome to LBW, who brought its 4th and 5th graders here to be with us this morning. Everyone on this level of the Sherman Center looks up to you also as an inspiration, and I want you all to know, LBW, and my son Oliver. Hi, Oliver. There you are, sitting in the very top row. I want you all to know that we believe that you are also hunger fighters. There is no age limit. There is no resume requirement for you to be inspired and to use the gifts that you've been given to do something to fight hunger here at home and around the world. So we believe in your ability to be that as well. And now to welcome Morgan Straub. Thank you, Morgan, so much for all of your hard work and dedication to making today possible. Morgan's a junior nursing major here at Dakota Wesleyan, and I think she's also majored in event planning this semester. I'm sure she'd love to have the credits for that as well. She served as a student chairperson for today's Hunger Summit. We're impressed by her organizational skills, her work ethic, and also for her passion for food security around the world. Thanks, Morgan.
Thanks, Alicia. And I'd like to thank you all for coming today. It's so fantastic to see so many different faces from all around the state and different ages come together for a day aimed at hunger awareness. I have the privilege of introducing our first speaker, and there sure has been a lot of buzz around campus about him today. Bob Reiners is an agriculture program specialist with the South Dakota Department of Agriculture. At the Department of Agriculture, Reiner serves as the State Apiarist, where he oversees the apiary registration and inspection program. He graduated from South Dakota State University with a Bachelor of Science degree in horticulture and has worked with the department since 1984. Since Reiners enjoys working with his own bees, he shares that passion with other beekeepers. His other hobbies include gardening, woodworking, auto mechanics, and bicycling. He and his wife Colette have 2 children. Welcome, Bob Reiners.
Well, good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. I apologize for my throat. I've been fighting a cold, and hopefully I can make it through. It's kind of interesting. I grew up with a passion and interest both in gardening and beekeeping, except the problem, I didn't start beekeeping until I was in college because I was mortified of the bee stings. I'd been stung by wasps and bees, and I thought, man, that hurts. I don't know if I want to do this every day. And it's kind of funny, when I was in college, there was an elective course that came available in entomology, and it's beekeeping, and it was only offered every other year. And I told my advisor that I really wanted to take that, and she said, well, you know, you already have a pretty heavy load. Just make sure if it's affecting your coursework, make sure you drop it in time before it affects your grade. And it turned out to be an easy 4-credit A for me. It was probably my most enjoyable class. Actually, it turned out, in fact, one of the professor for that class ended up recommending me for my position in Pierre after I graduated, and been there ever since. My wife kind of is amused at me that usually I can strike up a conversation with most anyone about beekeeping, and at the most interesting times, and I kind of lose track of time when I get to share that passion with other beekeepers. Let's see if we can advance our slide here. Okay. A lot of people don't realize, take it for granted how important honeybees are in our food supply. They claim that 1 out of every 3 bites of food come as a result of honeybee pollination, and 80% of our plants depend on that pollination. This happens to be an almond grove, and the bees pollinate up to $20 billion of crops annually. It's really interesting in the almond industry. Those plants are 100% dependent on honeybee pollination. And in fact, the almond growers cannot get their crop insurance if they do not have honeybees in the groves. South Dakota typically ranks in the top 5 honey producing state. We've been in the third position in the last few years, and I'm happy to announce the beekeepers feel strongly enough about my program that is totally funded by their dollar. They pay a registration fee. People would kind of think, well, we don't need sales tax money to go to support an apiary program, but the beekeepers pay for all the expenses. We have about 160 beekeepers right now. Our number of beekeepers has decreased, and now in the last few years has been coming back up a little bit with the resurgence of hobby beekeeping industry across the state. We have about 280,000 colonies in the state, and again, as I mentioned earlier, we rank in the top 3, and in 2014 we had about 24 million pounds here, and most of our colonies here in the state are shipped out of South Dakota right about now. It's been, by Thanksgiving, the migration of the bees out of the state will be pretty much completed. Okay, so why do these bees go out and visit all these flowers? They need 2 things in their diet. They need protein and they need carbohydrates. The pollen basket, it's kind of amazing. You think about the honeybee. She gets this hairy body all covered with this pollen, and she even has like a pollen rake on her front pair of legs, and she can rake this off, clean off her antennae, and can effectively move around from flower to flower. What's really fascinating, though, is the honeybees don't waste their time going from a pear blossom to a dandelion or something. When they get started on one type of flower, they work just strictly on that type of flower. And it depends on the time of the day. Sometimes in the morning, they maybe will be collecting pollen. Then the plant's physiological will start changing and secreting their nectar later in the day. Kind of depends on the flower source itself. So anyway, she can move all this pollen back into her pollen basket, and they carry it back. That's the protein in their diet. And then they have a sucking mouth part, and then they suck the nectar out of the flowers, which they carry back in their honey crop. They have 3 stomachs. Their first stomach is not contaminated with any gastric juices, and it's just where they can carry that nectar back and share it with the other bees in the hive. Okay, this pollination, well, we all know about that. That's this effective transfer of pollen in the blossom, and I'm really privileged. It's one of the best creatures we have to get that job done. Bees respond very well to being managed. Like in the pollination of the almonds, the beekeepers will go out earlier and start feeding them sugar syrup or corn syrup, pollen substitute, and trying to get them built up. And the honeybee really lends itself real well to being able to be managed that way. Okay, so what happens if you don't get good pollination? And here's just an example. Top one didn't get pollinated very well. Apples, the same thing. You'll have misshaped apples, raspberries, strawberries, and all that is important. And I always tell kids when I do bee talks, if you bite into an apple or some type of fruit like that, there's been a beekeeper or a honeybee involved somewhere, probably with bringing that fruit to your table. Here in South Dakota, we don't have much buckwheat anymore. A few years ago in the northeastern part of the state, we used to have a lot of buckwheat, and that was mostly an export to Japan, but we do have the clover and alfalfa, other apples, apricots, avocados, all these different crops, and the almonds is a really big one for our industry. They need about 1 million colonies for the almond pollination in California, and they just don't have enough bees there, and so our bees are transported out there. Okay, we do have sunflowers. We don't have much canola here. We get a little too warm at night. That's more into North Dakota and Canada. It responds better. We have cooler nights and produces better. Actually, we have one beekeeper up by Britain. He goes to Oregon, and he does a lot of seed crops like carrots and that type of thing in Oregon, and he brings his bees back out here. We don't have the cucuberts here as much. That's more up and down along the East Coast. But bees and beekeepers are very important in that production of our food. Here's just another slide to show you the difference, the dependence of these crops that need honeybees. Okay, just another thing, 1/3 of our diet is dependent. And then the other important thing, Dr. Wallstrom, who was at SDSU when I was there, he did some research how important the honeybees are to pollinating wild plants and forbs that even the pheasants are dependent on. Okay, our residents in the hive, we know the queen, the worker, and the drone. And it just kind of, I always get a kick out of it. People tell me I got bit by a bee. Well, you really didn't get bit. The stinger is on the opposite end of the mouth parts, and she doesn't have biting mouth parts. She has lapping mouth parts and mandibles, and it's really rather fascinating. They produce these wax scales on their abdomen, and then they take their mandibles and their mouth parts and they fashion them into this hexagon cell structure. Well, they're like engineers. You got to think about this. Inside the hive, it's just about totally dark, other than a little light that comes in the entryway. And they work in the dark. They work all around the clock, so it's just kind of amazing. They do kind of slow down at night and whatnot, but it's just really fascinating. Okay, there's Her Royal Highness. People always think that her being the queen, that maybe she's telling them what to do. She doesn't really tell them what to do, but she produces a pheromone, or a chemical odor, which is very interesting. Within minutes after her odor is removed, or she's removed from the hive, the bees can sense it. I go up and work a hive and open it up, and I give it a little puff of smoke, and they'll have like a little roar, and I can tell instantly whether it's a good sign that they're probably queenless. Oh, sorry. She lays about 1,500. She lays about 1,500 to 2,000 eggs a day, and again, she works strictly in the dark. It's kind of amazing. She comes up and she can sense the size of the cell, whether it's a drone cell or a worker bee, and then she knows whether her abdomen is longer, and then she knows whether to position a drone egg in there or a worker bee egg. And she has a smooth stinger, which I doubt if you'll ever be stung by a queen, unless you're a beekeeper that maybe raises queens. Normally they only use their stinger when there is a rival queen, mother-daughter queen in the hive. It doesn't happen very often, but I have seen it, and then they'll sting the other queen to kill her. Okay, the worker bee. Well, name implies she works from the day she's born to the day she dies. We have 40 to 60,000 bees, worker bees in a colony. They live 40 to 60 days, and it's proportional to the amount of time they're flying. And she has a barb stinger. When the stinger will stick in your skin when she stings you, and then she dies shortly thereafter. Oops. This thing is sensitive when you don't expect it. Okay. They have chores. Their first 15 days are spent in the hive. They're anywhere from guard bees, nurse bees. They take care of the queen. They clean the cells for the queen to come and lay an egg. They come and feed the young baby brood and that type of thing. And then their last 20 to 30 days, they're out foraging for nectar, pollen, and they do collect propolis. As Senator McGovern had mentioned about the fight against AIDS, it's really fascinating. We found that propolis is collected from the tree buds. And in Russia, it's called poor man's antibiotic. And they have done some research at the University of Minnesota. They found out in the lab they can kill the AIDS virus with propolis. Now they're trying to figure out what it is in the propolis. It's the active ingredient. Trying to figure out, are there different trees that are produce a better propolis than others. All I can tell you from experience, if you wash your bee clothes in your washer and dryer and your wife washes her blouses afterwards and there's propolis in there and it gets on her clothes, it's not a good day for Bob. Okay, the drone is the male in the hive. His only function is to mate with a new queen. They mate in the air and then the drone falls back to the ground and dies. The queen may mate with 5 to 7 drones, and then she never flies again. She only flies really on 2 occasions, her mating flight and a swarm. And there's a few hundred drones in the colony. They can't sting you. They're kind of intimidating. They're a little bigger. But the bad part, guys, is they're all kicked out in the fall. They don't want to waste their resources to feed these drones. Something that's really fascinating in my mind, we have what we call drone congregating areas. And we'll have like maybe this area over here. And what's really fascinating, these drones that are here this year are not the same drones that are here next year. However, they'll frequent that same drone congregating area. It just blows my mind how that information or what they're queuing in on for a landmark to mate or to hang out in that area. The queen flies through that area, the drones pick up on her pheromone, and they fly after her and try to mate with her. Oops. If we could peel back the bark on a tree and we'd see this is the kind of the cell building that they do. And again, it takes 7 to 11 pounds of honey to make a pound of beeswax. So that's why we try to reuse our frames and that type of thing every year. Okay, as I mentioned, a swarm. It's kind of intimidating when you see this cluster of bees. Just tell people to leave them alone. Generally, they're pretty calm. I had an unfortunate experience this spring, first aggressive swarm I've run into. Unfortunately, I was 25 feet up in the air on a man lift, and I didn't have my suit on. I just thought I'd quick shake it in a bee box and take it. And the guy that was running the man lift decided to take off because they were coming after him. But I was trying to figure out how to get out of that man lift. Unfortunately, he didn't have it set up so I could run it from where I was at. And these are the conditions. Springtime happens. We get that nice sunny weather. The bees are out collecting nectar and pollen. And they bring it back, and they rapidly start filling up their hive, and they get a little crowded, and the next thing we know, they take off. So anyway, the beekeeper's goal is to try to produce this honey. That's in South Dakota. Historically, we've been a honey-producing area, and these are frames that are going to be ready for extracting. If you go across the prairie in South Dakota or most any place, this is what we're all hopeful for, a good crop of honey to be harvested. And there's just a load of supers. You got to think these boxes, each individual box here weighs about 80 to 90 pounds. These are deeps. So if you have a bad back, you might think about, if you're going to go into beekeeping, use shallower boxes or a smaller beehive. And here's just a commercial outfit. They remove the frames, and the uncapper is to the right there. And it just shows the other end of the machine. And this spins the frame out. We use centrifugal force, and the honey collects down into the bottom of the machine, flows into a sump, and we pump it into tanks. That's the beauty of honey. We don't do anything to it. We do warm the supers a little bit prior to extracting, just to get the honey to flow out of the frames a little better. That's it. The bees collect the nectar. They add an enzyme to it. In the hive, they fan their wings and dehydrate the moisture. Like nectar out of a flower is 80-90% moisture. Honey is around 16% moisture. If you get over 18.5, you have fermentation. If you don't have controlled fermentation, then you got vinegar. So a lot of the honey in South Dakota runs closer to the 12.5 to 13%. Okay, we're going to talk a little bit about more issues that are occurring in the last few years. You've probably heard of CCD, or colony collapse. This was kind of scary. We started to see hives that would just dwindle down in population. You might see the queen and just a few worker bees left, and where did they go? When we deal with a bee kill, that's pretty obvious. In front of the hive, you'll see a pile of dead bees. We'd never see anything like that. The bees would just disappear, and they would be gone. And again, you'd see some honey and the bee brood there, and maybe a few workers. What we've determined, or the researchers have determined, there's a strong correlation between Israeli acute paralysis virus and nosema. Nosema is a midgut disorder of the honeybee. It's really amazing. We've had a nosema in our bees for years. Usually the only people that were concerned about nosema were queen breeders that were raising queens for other beekeepers, because that would affect the queen's ability to lay eggs. Most beekeepers didn't treat for it. The chemical we use, an antibiotic, is actually a little hard on the bees itself. And it was pretty expensive, and most beekeepers, they would do a little testing, but it was not much of a problem. The Asian bee, or Apis cerana, had a strain of nosema, and that jumped species from the Asian bee into the European bee. That coincidentally with the viruses. When I started in 1984, I only knew of one virus specialist in the world, and it was Dr. Brenda Ball over in the UK. And now we're becoming more and more aware of the occurrence of viruses in bees. Oops. Go on here a minute. Okay, some of the alleged causes of CCD, cell phone towers. That study was done in Germany, and they put a base unit for cordless phone in the hive, and it was right next proximity to the bees. Actually, most beekeepers jokingly commented the reason they had such good bees is they had such lousy cell phone coverage. And the beauty of the CCD is it didn't hit everybody at the same time, so they were able to probably buy replacement bees or brood from one of their neighbors. There was some concern about contaminated corn syrup, chemical residue, the GMO crops, There was even blame on migratory beekeeping. South Dakota started with migratory beekeeping probably back in the 50s. I'm really having a hard time with that one, yes, where it's on a bigger scale now. It's hard on the bees, yes, but I'm just really not grasping that one. I don't see that as the big issue. A lack of genetic diversity. I'll get into my pests in a minute. But what happened after in the 87, 88 in there when the varroa mite was introduced, and it did spread into the feral population or the wild bees, we started losing a lot of our wild honeybees. And so we didn't have that genetic crossing into our bees. And then I think the bigger one is the honeybee parasites, pathogens. This just kind of gives you a pictorial view of the number of hives in the world, in the United States. And we can tell in about 2007, that's when we were down there, around a little under 3 million hives. It's kind of funny, when I started in 84, we had one major pest we were dealing with, and that was American foul brood. It's a bacterial disease. A honeybee larvae under 96 hours of age is fed contaminated honey, and it breaks down with this disease. And the reason it was called foul brood was because of the bad odor that it developed as the honeybees were dying. That's something that's been a problem for beekeepers since the 40s. They just have gone through a different, we used to use sulfa, but that was banned a number of years ago. And oxytetracycline, or TM, terramycin, was a common chemical of choice. If we're carefully feeding it to the bees spring or fall when they're not making a surplus honey crop, it worked out really well. Well, shortly after I started, we started developing a problem with terramycin-resistant foul brood. And there was a paper that came out of Germany that said there was maybe some link to the Roundup Ready crops, and I don't know, I don't really know if that was really the issue or not. But anyway, then we had to jump over to a different antibiotic. And then after that point in time, we had beekeepers that started selecting for hygienic behavior in the bees. And then so the bees would have some natural resistance itself. This just kind of again shows the onset of the colony collapse. But it was interesting on the right in the green bars, it actually started showing our colony loss would normally occur during the winter or the off-peak months when bees were wintering and hopefully building up. The green bars show that actually our colony loss would continue to occur during the summertime, which is something we really haven't happened. I was just in a bee yard just a few weeks ago. The colony, the yard started with 48 hives this spring, and there were 28 left now, and that's a little extreme. Normally we'd see 10 to 20%, but we wouldn't see that great a colony loss. Queens will fail, they just can't replace themselves. Okay, the directions of the colony collapse, or CCD, the pathogens, parasites, management, and environmental. So this nosema that we deal with is a midgut, and it just shows how we tease the bee apart. And we look at the midgut. That's the longer, the healthy one is that larger brown segment, football-shaped, and the diseased is the white one. And the viruses. This shows the different viruses. Black queen cell virus and deformed wing virus are pretty common. And then it gets down to the other ones like Lake Sinai virus. They actually found that was a new virus identified over here by Lake Sinai by Brookings. And then acute bee paralysis, Israeli acute, cashmere, chronic bee paralysis, and sac brood. So a lot more viruses than you ever care to know about. Okay, we've been participating in a national honeybee survey for the last few years. We get to randomly select 24 yards or different beekeepers. We go in and test, and then this just shows the different viruses that we were looking for. Tropolaelaps mite on the far right is a pest that's not known to occur here yet, and then one of the other pests, we're hoping it doesn't show up here, but it would tell us the different pests in our bees. We're just trying to determine a disease base or a level of what exists in our hives here. Okay, I don't know if you can see this, but on the thorax of the bee, there's the varroa mite. It's kind of a little shiny. It looks, I explained to people, it looks like a tick on a bee. And you can see her wings are highly deformed. What's interesting is we will find the deformed wing virus in the bees, but we'll not necessarily find the deformed wings. Then that bee will not be able to survive very long. And then as these mites, they crawl in the cell and reproduce as the brood is developing. and then they, as they bite and pierce on the honeybee, they spread these viruses. This tracheal mite, this pest gets into the tracheal opening of the honeybee, crawls into the breathing apparatus of the bees, and you got to understand these trachea are right around their primary flight muscles in their thorax. So I got ahead of myself a minute ago, and I started in '84. We had to deal with foul brood. This was detected in 1984, and by '87 or '88, this was really affecting a lot of bees. We'd see bees that would die off with the trachea would be stained, really scarred, and they would be reproducing. Really fortunately, University of Guelph, they did some work on it, and they started isolating certain breeds of bees or strains of bees that were more resistant. And fortunately, right now, today, we don't really treat much for tracheal anymore because the bees have bred some resistant bees. And now this is a relatively newer pest. The little black critter is a small hive beetle. And they're kind of they don't necessarily affect the hives all that much unless they get into higher numbers. They're a tropical, subtropical critter. In the southern states, they're much more of a problem. Up here, we don't realize that big a problem unless a beekeeper harvests his honey and he brings it into his honey house where it's in a warm, humid environment in the hot room, we call it, where we try to get it up to about 100 degrees to extract. The big problem is now you can't hold your honey in there for more than about 3 days because they'll start reproducing in that warm environment. Okay, the apiary management stresses. They were saying poor nutrition. Well, a lot of beekeepers are feeding pollen substitutes. Actually, it's been kind of interesting this year. We've been seeing more interest in probiotics for bees, and it's kind of a relatively new field. And the migratory bee moving, this is hard on the bees. They get stacked up like this. There's drifting that occurs in the bee yard, and it's hard on them. For example, of the migratory movement in and out of South Dakota, we got a lot of bees that move here. Okay, and why do they do this? Well, the crop pollination is a really big thing for our guys, and then they come back here for honey production, and then some of our guys just go to like Texas or southern states and raise their queens, and will sell brood and sell package bees. The pollination has really been an important thing. It's been kind of a lifesaver for us. We were impacted by a lot of imported honey over the last few years, selling at much lower production costs than what we could do here. Actually, the beekeeping industry has paid for some anti-dumping cases to try to get tariffs put on that honey. Some of the cases, the honey would be adulterated also with corn syrup or cane rice syrup, and it would be brought over, and there would be packers that would know that they could unscrupulously blend that in with American honey and cheapen up their product. This just kind of gives an overview of how the bees move. Bees are on wheels in the United States. They're definitely moving all over. Our historic movement has been from here to Texas, Mississippi, and Louisiana, and then now that has become more to California. But we have bees that go down south, they go out to California, they come back to Texas or Arkansas. We have one guy up here in the northeastern part of the state, goes to Arkansas, California, back to Arkansas, and then up to Maine, and then he comes back here in June and then splits his bees up and just tries to build bees for pollination. This is about it. It's hard on the bees. Just kind of shows a picture of the bees. They're drifting. Some other hives have probably lost some of their bees, and that's where it's just tough on the bees. Okay, this is where we have to move the bees at night, early morning or at night when they return to their hive. You can't see it, but there's some poor fellow that's on top of the load. That's the guy you gotta respect, because those bees start crawling at night, and you tape up everything around your pants legs and everything because they get crawly, and you're trying not to fall off the truck, and you got all these bees trying to sting you, and it's just not fun. This load is arriving in California and getting ready to be offloaded. I have not seen this myself, but I've been told there's certain places in California there's just thousands of hives offloaded and waiting to go into almond pollination later. Okay, and again, here's the almond pollination. It's been a real lifesaver. Almonds have been kind of a Cinderella crop the last few years with the health values or properties of the almond. and it's been real good for our bee industry. It's saved a lot of them where the honey prices had dropped down so much. We got some guys that go to Maine for blueberries, cranberries, Wisconsin. And then this leads on to why other guys migrate to southern states to split up their hives. We used to see guys that would kill off half of their bees or more and take them down south, and they could split up their bees in the spring and come back. That doesn't happen much anymore. They're either looking at sending those bees to somebody in California for pollination, but you get to enjoy springtime twice. That's kind of the one reason I like migratory bee moving. I enjoy springtime. I'm a gardener or whatnot, and you get the bees down there. The bees start building earlier. You can split them up, raise queens, and then you can bring them up here and get to enjoy spring again. These are just some bees that are being ready to be split up. They have nice strong hives, bees all over the top bars. And here they're just removing frames, getting ready. And when we call this divides or splits, they just take the strong bees. Usually they do it in March. Take 2 frames of brood and a frame of bees, give them a queen cell, and then leave them alone for about 28 days, let that queen emerge, let her come out, come back about 28 days later and see if she's laying, and then they'll replace her if she didn't take. And then they keep feeding them and bring them back in May. These are just some more hives that are making up splits. Okay, one of the perils of migratory bee moving. It's kind of a bee guy's worst nightmare. Most guys don't haul their own bees anymore. They hire commercial carriers, so they're hopefully well insured. Okay, one of the environmental stressors. Boy, there's a beautiful looking corn and beans, but one of the problems we've had is we've lost these other habitat acres with the increase in commodity prices, and then we lose some of this extra area. But the ironic thing is, bees can collect nectar out of the soybeans, and they've actually showed that there can be a little bit of a yield boost they'll get the bottom pods pollinated better, and actually they need the pollen substitute to feed their bees. And the bee guys also use a lot of corn syrup. The bees don't collect nectar all year round. We have to supplement their feed. I've been told that the bee industry is the second largest consumer of high fructose corn syrup, in addition to the pop industry. And I don't know if that's true or not, but I know guys that buy several semi-loads that need to feed their bees to keep them alive. Okay, part of our National Honeybee Survey, we were looking at these environmental stressors, and this just shows some of the chemicals we were finding in the pollen of the bees. It's just kind of chlorpyrifos, lorsban, and whatnot. It's like coumaphos. Some of those were bee products that we would kind of expect in the beehive. And again in 2012. Okay, so why does this matter? Well, it comes back to we have this third of our food depends on the insects, honeybee pollination. There's other pollinators. There's like 3,500 different species of bees, I believe, 35 or 4,500. I just pretty much strictly work with honeybees. But the important thing is we do need these creatures in our environment to help pollinate and to bring food to our tables. And they're very effective at it. Actually, the Logan lab in Utah, they've looked at trying to work with some other wild pollinators. In case if you're raising greenhouse tomatoes, you're going to more aptly use bumblebees because they work a little better in the environment inside a greenhouse. Honeybees, they fly up to the cover of the canopy, the poly, and then they just wear themselves out. They don't work well inside a greenhouse. The concerns in the bee industry is just our loss of bee pasture. We're seeing a lot of pastures broken up, extensive spraying of the road ditches. They're not against noxious weed control, but they just don't like to see blanket spraying of road ditches and whatnot. The neonicotinoid issue, that's been, a lot of the bee guys want to immediately blame all their concerns on the neonics. This is a seed treatment that goes on the seed. Well, there can be both aerial and seed treatment. They contend, it's been shown that seed, when it germinates and it grows, that neonicotinoid treatment moves into the plant sap, and then as a pest would come and feed on the plant, it would be feeding on that chemically filled sap in the plant and would kill it. The bees don't get involved that much right there, but when we've seen in sunflowers, there's a metabolic boost of activity in the plant, and it would show them but nectar and pollen. I don't know if the neonics deserve all the blame that they've gotten, but it's definitely an issue. We've had some concerns this year where we saw bees that were actually killed during planting time, and that is really weird. It's hard for me to understand how the dust coming off a planter can kill bees, but we did identify it in the dead bees. And this is the issue. EPA calls this dust off. It's really hard for me to imagine that's a problem, but they claim 1 kernel of corn, there's enough chemical on that kernel to kill 80,000 bees. I don't know, I'm having a hard time grasping that. I thought this was one of the best win-win situations we would have had. You're not having a whole aerial application of chemicals. I've dealt with sunflowers where I have to confine my bees or move them in and out after a field was sprayed. And I thought, man, if you can have this seed that's treated, it goes in the ground, the bees aren't going to come in contact with it. Man, this is great. It's soil stable. It doesn't leach out of the soil profile. It shouldn't get into our water. I thought, man, this is perfect, but it's just not quite there. This was in the southeastern part of the state this spring, early May, late April, and it was just right during planting season. So what can we do? Well, I'm always encouraging people to be careful with their use of chemicals. In the neonicotinoid issue, I was talking to a researcher, and I thought it's probably safer for a bee in a residential community than it is in an agronomic situation. And she says, hate to differ with you, but the concentrations of the chemicals are used on grub control and Jap beetle in certain areas. They're 30 to 40 times the concentrations that are being used on agronomic crops. So I think it's just judicious use of chemicals so that they're sprayed either or used early morning or late at night. That's what worked for me a lot. When I had a field, sunflowers for a farmer, I'd move my bees in. I would have to go out and stuff the entrances with paper towels. That would allow the time for the chemical to dry down, and then the bees could go out and start foraging later. It worked really, really well for the first time. Second time, if they had to respray, the bees found the other holes in the boxes, and then it didn't work quite so good, but it's pretty effective. And if I can get the applicator to spray early morning or late at night. Try not to spray during bloom time, but if you have to, you maybe use a material that's got less residual. Some of the synthetic pyrethroids are pretty effective. They don't have as long as residual as compared to Lorsban or some of those kinds of things. And then spot spraying, we're really encouraging in the highway right-of-way. Well, there's not just pollinators or honeybees that are being impacted right now with our loss of habitat, but the governor's been concerned about pheasants and their habitat pays program. There's actually a real deep concern for the monarch butterfly and some of the other issues that we're dealing with, and they all benefit. They found, is that the pheasants need the soft body insects to feed on. Well, guess what? When you have plants that are there that are beneficial for the bees, you've got those little soft body insects. So it's all a habitat thing, win-win-win, and hopefully we'll see more interest in that, and we'll know that it's an issue for us. And I guess that's all I really have. I don't know if we have time for any questions or not. I'll try to answer some yet before we go on to the next speaker. Okay. Sorry. I'll just put my bee veil on. I was going to bring my whole suit, and I'll just explain a little bit of this in a minute.
All right, if there's any questions, would you raise your hand? I'll bring the mic to you so we can hear.
A lot of the time when I'm out in the bee yard, this is just exactly how I go. I don't usually have my suit on, except when I'm moving bees, or springtime when I'd go down in Texas and help make splits. Because then sometimes your days are kind of cloudy and misty, and the bees they like nice sunny weather when they can out forage. This is our smoker. You imagine you start a fire down in the bottom. We use things like hay or kind of punky, half-rotten wood, whatever. You want a cool smoke. You don't want flame. You don't want flames coming out of the smoker. It's just a billows, and it calms the bees. I never go into the bee yard without my smoker or the hive tool, because this propolis that the bees collect from the tree buds is very rosiny and sticky, and it's how they seal up all their cracks. And actually, they're finding now that the bees will actually store that propolis away inside the hive for maybe other future needs. And I got to tell you, I had a sore throat, and I don't know why I didn't think of it this week. But I was headed on the way out to a bee yard, and I'd always been told about this antiseptic characteristic. And man, I was on my way to my bee yard one Saturday morning, and I thought, man, if I don't get better by Monday, I'm going for a strep test. And I got to the bee yard, and I thought, what do I have to lose? I scraped off a little propolis and kind of started sucking on it. I got to tell you, it doesn't taste that good. But anyway, I kind of sucked on it, and I thought, oh, this isn't working. I was expecting something very fast. And so anyway, then I just kind of spit it out, and all of a sudden, about 30 minutes later, I realized, gee, I don't have a sore throat anymore. Maybe there's something to that. So anyway, you don't want to use it all the time. I have some in my freezer at home. I keep it there for when I get to feel a little not so perky, and know why I didn't think of it this time. But anyway, here's our bee veil, or our bee gloves. I will wear a suit, and usually we wear white because the bees don't like dark colors. Normally I have to take my watch off. They get really antagonistic towards dark things. And normally I have work boots on, whatnot, because, partly we have rattlesnakes in my area also, and I'm always kind of leery of snakes, but also I just kind of, the bees don't like dark colors, so we wear a light suit or light clothing. But most of the time I'm just like this. I wear a long sleeve shirt with my sleeves rolled up in case I get into some nasty bees and I can roll my sleeves down. So anyway. Okay.
My name is John. I'm a student here. Question for you. A couple years ago, commodity prices jumped like crazy. We were getting $7 bushel corn in that. Now we're getting, $3.08, I think it was, on the radio the other day. With that, plus the habitat pays, do you think we'll start seeing a reversal from the habitat habitat fields that we lost going back into habitat?
Well, I sure hope so. I think I haven't seen any numbers recently on that, but that's definitely, the upper 5 states, North Dakota, South Dakota, Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Michigan, where a lot of these bees come for the summer. There's actually been some more federal money for that, for farmers to increase more habitat. I think it's starting, they're realizing with the lower commodity price, the high input prices. Man, if I was a farmer and I had $7 corn or whatever, I'd be trying to increase all I could. That's why I was a horticulture major, real high value crops. I'd be driven after that thing, but I'm really hoping we'll see. The bee guys need the farmers. We're not trying to say or mandate what they got to do. We desperately need our farmers out there, and we need them to make money, so hopefully they'll have some acres. Just one thing I saw when I was at an EPA meeting this spring out in Oregon, that was a blueberry farm. And in fact, what they were doing for their habitat, they had some acres around the perimeter of their blueberry fields where they were having habitat that would be more attractive. They go in, they mow down all their dandelions during the blueberry bloom, so when they have to spray, the bees aren't over there where they're having to direct their chemical treatments. And so then the bees would be attracted to other area where it would be safer for them. So yes, we definitely hope we see some increase in habitat for the bee guys. Thank you.
All right, we've got time for one more question, but Bob will be around after this, and you might be able to catch up with him if you have more, but here's one more question.
What are the updates on the killer bees from the south? Are they migrating?
They've migrated up about into Oklahoma in the south central part of the country. We've been a little concerned if they would cross with our European guys, the queens, the bees that are open mating in Texas and whatnot. What happened a number of years ago, and I can't remember when that was, 80s or 90s, when the Africanized bee was first moving up, they had a really heavy freeze, and then the varroa mite became more prevalent, and that really set back the Africanized bee advancement. But they're still picking up some interceptions, like into Oklahoma and whatnot. And in Southern California, some of those areas in the Rio Grande Valley where they're having to deal with it a little more on an ongoing basis. They really are set off by lawnmowers, bulldozers, and that type of thing. The thing about Africanized bees, they're much more of a ground nesting bee than our honeybees. And that's where they'll be like in a meter box or a valve box for a sprinkler system. And people have to be a little more cognizant or aware of that. Most of our guys, it's hard work. They don't like getting stung up any more than anything. They worry about their landowners and their livestock, so they do not, as a rule, try not to tolerate any mean bees, and we'll either kill those hives or try to get them requeened. We're actually seeing some interest more in rearing queens in a northern climate and then using those for breeder queens. Just like you have farmers that raise bulls, there'll be beekeepers that raise breeder stock and then use that for your mating material. But recently I haven't heard of any too much problem with Africanized bees, thank goodness.
Thanks, Bob, for that sweet presentation. All right, I just have a few announcements here. If you look at your program, you will see that it's now time for a breakout session, and then also if you there's a breakout session, and you will see that it's now time for, led by South Dakota State University students who will be discussing childhood nutrition. The breakout session will be in East Main, and if you head upstairs, and if you use the left staircase, if you head upstairs immediately upon exiting the Sherman Center to locate East Main, find a student in a gray shirt if you get lost, and bathrooms are also located across the hall in the Sherman Center, and exhibitors for bowls for today's lunch are on display in Wagner Chapel, also across the hall. And also, on each table, there's one sticker under each chair, and if you grab that sticker, whoever has that sticker, the honey bear that's on your table, that's yours. So you guys can enjoy that, whoever has that sticker under their table. So, and then after the presentation, please return to the Sherman Center promptly by 11 to hear Matt Gaston and feeding. Thank you.